Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. Thanks for tuning in and joining me on the show. Spending your time with me. I appreciate it. We're going to talk today about something that's called Sensate focus, and it is a staple in the sex therapy world. It's touching technique, really, that we use. Individuals can do it, but often it's done with couples to help have an experiential process together that helps people be present, reduce anxiety, focus on themselves, and as my guest is going to explain, really gets you into the part of your brain where you need to be to access arousal and desire, as opposed to the parts of our brain that are evaluating and analyzing and self-criticizing and worrying and all those places that we can spin ourselves up that are really a total killer to sex. And so Sensate focus was originally developed by Masters and Johnson, and as Linda Weiner is going to tell you, it's really the very first physical experiential approach to sexual difficulties. Before that, it was all talk as if it was about just intrapsychic, family of origin stuff, or only mental stuff between couples. So it's really fundamental to have a touching experience together. So Linda Weiner is a sex therapist in St. Louis. She studied where Masters and Johnson worked. She realized that they had really never written it up in ways that were effective. So she's written a book about it, and she is here to tell you all about Sensate focus, and we'll give you some good ideas about where to start and how to proceed if you decide this is something we want to do. Because while you can certainly do that with a sex therapist, there's a fair amount of this that you could actually do on your own. So hope you get a lot out of it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. Linda, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Absolutely. Delighted that you asked me to join you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually been on my list to get to for like a year and a half. I wanted to talk to you about Sensate focus. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad all the stars aligned and we're finally getting to make this happen.
Lovely. Because I love to talk about Sensate focus, and I love people to try it and see how powerful it is. Very simple, but very powerful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could start by just sort of talking about what it is and where it came from. Like, sure. What's the history and the definition here?
Gotcha. So prior to the people who did the sex research on what actually happens in the body when we get turned on and when we are orgasmic, Masters and Johnson, they were here in St. Louis. Prior to their understanding of what happens during sexual interaction when things go well, they took that information and then they applied it to when things are not going well. But prior to them doing this research and developing this short-term treatment for sexual difficulties, the real treatment for people who had sexual dysfunction was 3 times a week on the analytic couch for 5 years. And there wasn't much in the way of understanding besides intrapsychic issues and family of origin issues, which still do play a role. But
right.
Masters and Johnson found out that there were 3 things that people who were sexually functional did, and I'll review them. And out of that experience, they created short-term sex therapy. And Sensate Focus, which is a touching technique, is the basis of all sex therapy, or most sex therapy that modern sex therapists do today. Basically, all it is a series of structured touching opportunities that couples engage in, or it could be an individual who does self-sensate focus. But basically, it involves trying to turn off the front part of your brain where we do everything. Okay.
Well, like inner criticism, right? And analysis.
Right. Yeah. And get into the primal brain, which is where all natural functions, breathing, respiration, sleep, and arousal are all lodged. And it was invented by actually Virginia Johnson, because what they had discovered in their research was that from people most of the time, or often, there was anxiety associated with sexual interaction. And it was the anxiety that would set up the fight, flight, or freeze thing in the brain. And that is the opposite of what needs to happen in order for the body to function. So they needed some way to help people relax. And Virginia was a rather high-strung young woman and girl. And she had remembered that her mother used to trace her face to help relax her when she was a child. And so she theorized that touch, which is the primal technique for comfort and bonding and relaxation, that touch could be potentially used for individuals and couples as a way to relax the body and get the brain, this part of the brain, turned off and have them be in the part of the brain where things could actually happen. So on the basis of that, they developed this touching technique. So I thought that was a rather interesting historical.
I've never heard that story before. I am struck that the fight or flight is sort of in the same part of the brain, right? It's not the prefrontal cortex. It's the same part we're trying to access in a more positive way.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so the idea of Sensate Focus is you start out with touching, using just your hands and fingers. And let's say it's the individual. Let's say it's a person who's been through cancer treatments, has some body image issues, sees her body as the enemy, and it's a way of getting back in touch with the body in a more accepting way. And so basically you turn off your evaluation and you focus using your hands and fingers. You focus on the sensations of touch, temperature, texture of hair and skin, and pressure. When I use a firmer touch, does it feel differently than it feels otherwise? And you don't ask yourself, is it feeling differently? Because then you're back in this part of your brain.
Okay.
So it starts out with just touching and focusing on the sensations. And whenever your mind wanders to something else, like, does this woman who's giving me the instructions know what she's doing? You bring it back to temperature, texture, pressure. And then your mind goes, is this going to work? Temperature, texture, pressure. What is my partner, if it's a couple? What is my partner thinking about this? Temperature, texture, pressure. So it is a way to refocus attention to the correct part of the brain that we're looking for in a relaxed state. And when you catch yourself off evaluating or having anxious thoughts, you just refocus. And then once you get the hang of that, then you can move on to touching to include breasts and genitals, then touching mutually, then touching where one partner places his or her genitals next to the other person's. Again, it's not sexual. The focus is on sensual. And actually, it's a mindfulness exercise. You know, I use the example with clients when you're trying to fall asleep, which is another natural function, like arousal and orgasm, and you can't fall asleep because you're worried about a meeting or something the next day.
Right.
And so they tell you to focus on sheep, counting sheep. And at first I thought, well, that's to bore you to sleep. But no, while you're counting sheep, you can't be worried about what if I don't get to sleep? Okay. What if I don't get to sleep is anxiety producing. Counting sheep is at least neutral. And so what happens then is natural function can take over. So in the same way, when you're touching yourself non-evaluatively and bringing your attention back, or you're being touched by your partner or vice versa, you bring your attention back. It is a mindfulness experience. And instead of using, say, an ohm or using a flicker of a candle, what you're focused on is sensual sensations rather than visual sensation. You're using tactile touch as a way to ground you, to relax you. And then your body knows what to do. It clears the way, it clears the space for that to happen.
So it sounds like we're filling up the bandwidth. You know, if we focus on sensation or the flickering candle or the sheep, whatever, our brain can't do this other thing at the same time, right? Like we're wrangling this monkey we have in our head.
Exactly. And so it works so amazingly well. And the other thing that is a product here is you're not touching for your partner. See, in our culture, the focus is on being a good lover. So I'm supposed to touch you to turn you on while you're touching me to turn me on. But what Masters and Johnson discovered is that's not really how good sex works. Good sex actually works when you're so unromantic, touching for yourself, focusing on your own sensation and bringing yourself back from distraction. And that runs counter to the cultural script that we're supposed to be feeding each other chocolate pudding to each other's mouths in the dark. That's But I say, when you're having an orgasm, who are you thinking of?
Yeah.
People kind of go, well, I'm not thinking at all. Exactly.
Right.
The state to which we want to get.
It is wild to think there was time, I may believe you, that we would have addressed sexual difficulties in a non-physical way. I mean, it's just such a physical experience. And, like I get what you're saying too about the connection between touch and our brains and what we're doing. But it just seems the work is so experiential. It's hard to believe that it hasn't always been,
Yes, that sex therapy hasn't been. But I don't think really that there was an understanding of what natural function related to sex was. They thought of it as having intrapsychic conflict. And I'm not saying that isn't part of it. Sometimes, as I say, the genitals are smarter than you are.
Right.
It's a bad relationship, okay?
Yeah, right.
And then you have to go back to figuring out how come I keep choosing this kind of relationship, and maybe it goes back to family of origin. And now we're into more deeper psychotherapy. But sex therapy using Sensate Focus is you do as little as you need to do in order to get the effect. If you need to go back to childhood, then you do. If you need to deal with relationship dynamics, you do. You want to make sure it's safe, but it doesn't have to be perfect, because actually doing Sensate Focus with couples, once you get some of the negativity resolved a little bit, it doesn't have to be perfect. But when you start doing the touching and you're touched by your partner and you're touching your partner, you start to feel bonded and connected, and then some of the relationship issues become less important. For example, whether they always remember to turn the light off or not is less irritating, because you're getting so much positive feeling from the person that some of the minor irritations go away.
Yeah.
So that is, it's an adjunct to relationship therapy sometimes, because sometimes relationship therapists that don't use Sensate Focus or aren't trained in sexuality, their theory is if we deal with the couple's problems,
right, sex will just happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's true. And then other times, no, you need to give some physical suggestions for the couple that aren't terribly stressful or easy to do, take 15 minutes or so to do on a 2 to 3 time a week basis, that builds the skill set of getting your brain out of the way, that builds the arousal template. In other words, just being touched, even if you don't feel aroused, a certain number of times, and your body will turn on. That's just what the body does. If you put a plate of food, if you don't have a serious eating disorder, and you put a plate of food that smells delicious, even if you're not thinking about eating, suddenly you develop an appetite. And this is somewhat the same, that it works by building up sexual tension until your body ultimately turns on.
So this is making me, I've got a bunch of questions swirling in my mind. It sounds like it's a systematic process. You gradually move from stage to stage to stage. And I'm wondering about how you figure out where you are, or what makes this approachable to somebody who maybe has a lot of anxiety. Like, how do they sort of titrate this to be useful and not overwhelming? You know what I mean?
Yes. So I think so. So basically what you do is you have, you touch yourself, or you have a couple touch with one another. And usually the first time is, your mind is going a million miles a minute. The second time you kind of relax a little and get into it. By the third time, it's like, oh, yes, I was able to touch for myself, focus on sensation, and bring myself back from distraction. Okay, great. You've managed the anxiety of that kind of physical interaction. Now we're going to add another element. So it's, you reduce the anxiety about each step. You don't have to be completely, relaxed, totally. But okay, we're going to add breasts, or breasts and genitals, or just genitals, or you'll just touch your partner's breasts, or he or she will just touch yours. We break it down according to what is the next logical step that this person can do that manages anxiety, so that they can move to that next step. I see it as sort of like, I grew up in New Jersey, and I watched people getting into the ocean. So you put a toe in,
Yeah.
and then you acclimate, you kind of watch people that are not drowning, and then you put your knee, up to your knee. And by the time you get to the crotch, you're either in or out. So it's a systematic desensitization is what psychologists would refer to this, where you manage anxiety and then you go to the next thing that might be anxiety producing. So let's say you have a problem with erections, and the therapist is now suggesting that you include genitals. Now you're going to have anxiety because the old you is performance oriented. Oh, right. When he or she touches my penis, it's supposed to be hard.
Right. What's my penis doing? What's my penis doing?
Right. And so now I'm watching myself, and now I'm sweating, and now I'm not in my body. And so you process that and kind of go, okay, so let's go over this again. I don't care if you have engorgement or you don't have engorgement. As a matter of fact, if you start watching that, I'll give you a technique to use to manage anxiety and refocus your attention on something else. And then after 2 or 3 times, they are able to have their genitals or their breasts or both touched, and with no, watching, anxiety, panic attack problem. And then we go on to increasing the stimulation by having them touch each other at the same time, okay, which provides a lot more stimulation because you are touching and being touched. So you're getting stimulation from 2 places at once. And this is where usually the combustion happens, where if they haven't felt arousal before, they often will feel arousal at this point in time when there's stimulation from more than one place. And then we manage that, and that's great. And then the next thing is go astride your partner and play with your genitals and their genitals together. Now we got another spike of anxiety. Oh my gosh. Okay. And 2 or 3 more times. And so then often at this stage, what we get is couples coming in going, you told me just to play outside, but I'm sorry, it's been 7 years. We were both aroused. We were bad.
Right.
You kind of tell when they've been bad. They come in, their heads are
bad,
down.
meaning, oh gosh, we actually had sex or something.
Yes. Yeah. Instead of doing our suggestion of playing outside, no, we inserted. We just couldn't help ourselves. We're sorry. I'm like, okay, but see that you don't do it again. Okay. Because literally, I'm delighted when that happens, but if you get couples where that's an expectation,
right,
it's always going to feel the same. I'm going to get hard. We're going to have insertion every time. Sex doesn't work that way. Sleep doesn't work that way. When you have one night's sleep, that's great. It doesn't mean the next night it's going to be any better, but you don't go, oh my gosh, I'm never going to sleep again.
Right.
People with sexual difficulties go, oh my gosh, I didn't get aroused. I might never get aroused again.
Yeah.
So I always go back to talking about other natural functions and how they work. And I find that that's a very helpful analogy. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, you did. So, but it sounds like it is somewhat customizable. Not everybody's going to get into that cold ocean at the same rate or with the same progression, right? So it's about creating enough anxiety, but not too much. That's how I think about that.
And since if as a therapist, I'm giving the instruction and I'm taking the partner out of the way, because usually what happens is somebody is pressuring and the other person responds by withdrawing even more.
Right.
The person who is pressuring, I take them out of the role. I said, you know what? That's my job now. If he or she is not moving quickly enough, is coddling themselves, I'll be the one to help them with that. If they're going too quickly, I'll be the one. I'm taking you out of the conflict situation that you've been in. And so I work with the couple to figure out what's the logical next step for this person. And it's a beautiful thing. I get so many clients that have different levels of sexual desire, where one has a much higher level of sexual interest and the other one not so much. And the one with a lower sexual interest initially continues to try to meet the demand or the need of their partner. And so what happens is it was like this, and now the more the partner presses, less. Okay, so there is no pressure. There's a situation like that. It doesn't matter if you want to do the Sensate focus. It doesn't matter if you like the Sensate focus. It's a just do it kind of thing. And there's no need for you to feel any certain way about it. Like, how come you didn't enjoy it? None of that is present. I also talk to couples so much of the time about having choices, and couples where this is a problem. I'm like, okay, so does your partner need to eat at the same time of day as you eat, the same amount of food that you eat?
And like the same things, right?
And like the same things. Do you say, oh, I'm going to go have go urinate? You need to come urinate also. You must need to urinate because I need to urinate. And they laugh just like that.
Right.
There is no other natural function that we expect. Both people have or want or need the same. We say, okay, what do you owe them? You owe them. If you're not hungry, you say, hey, I'll go to the restaurant and maybe I'll have an appetizer while you have a meal. But then you realize when you smell the food and you see the food and no one's saying, you have to eat everything on your plate.
Right.
Oh, can I have one of your French fries? So where there is no pressure and there is an acceptance that there will be differences, sometimes that's all you need is permission not to have a full course turkey dinner each time.
Yeah. Hey, this is Jess. I'm just taking a quick break, and I want to make sure you know about the guide I wrote about how to talk to your partner about sexual concerns. This comes up a lot in my practice. People have struggles, and it takes them so long to bring it up with their partner. They're afraid that conversation is going to go badly. Their partner's going to be upset. The partner's going to be defensive, or they just don't know how to talk about sex and sexual problems. Common problem. So I wrote this guide that really helps you address this. It helps you prepare for the conversation, how to introduce the conversation, and then tips about how to actually get through the conversation so that you can change things with your partner as a team. If you are interested in this guide, you can find it at bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Again, bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Happy to send it to you. When the touching is happening, let's say we're at genitals or breast and genitals phase of this, who's in charge of how that touching, like what that touching actually is and what that's like? Do you have thoughts about whether it's a toucher or the person being touched?
So the person being touched has two jobs: take in the sensations of being touched, however they are, but their partner can only touch for themselves if your role is to let them know if anything is psychologically or physically uncomfortable. Initially, not what you like or how you like to be touched. That's for when we no longer have any kind of sexual problem.
Yeah.
And icing on the cake, and I'll be incorporating what you like into the way I touch you. But initially, it's all about if something's psychologically or physically uncomfortable, You move your partner's hand. You put your hand over or under theirs to hand ride, RIDE, just to let them know. Or, let's say that you're a little bit fearful about losing control.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have a history of being molested. So it's going to be important for you to feel like you're in control, not by controlling it with a no, but by controlling where your partner's hand is, how long it stays there. And we ask the partner whose hand is being moved or ridden to think of it as, instead of, oh my God, I'm not touching the right way. He or she isn't liking this and they're moving my hand. It's a rejection. I ask them to see it as it's the nicest thing your partner can do. It takes all the pressure off you to be the mind reader.
Right.
And take it as an act of vulnerability on their part rather than as an act of rejection.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
So they're always in control and they can always stop.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the kinds of sexual difficulties where you recommend Sensate focus? Or maybe it's better to ask, are there any where you don't? Like, is it ever, contraindicated, or what? Is it especially effective with certain things than others?
I've used it for the range of sexual difficulties, low desire or no desire. Used it for any kind of sexual dysfunction with erections or orgasm or ejaculation problems, either too rapidly or not at all, or too, very delayed. I've used it for the range of those. I've used it for people who suffered trauma. I've used it for people who have body image issues, or some kind of post-surgery. Things have changed in their bodies. Men who've had prostate surgery and have erection difficulties, and we may not know if it's now medically impossible for them to get an erection, or whether it's their anxiety about not getting an erection and how things have changed.
Right.
Gets in the way. So I've used it for all kinds of sexual difficulties. So I really don't know a time when it's not useful, including just when couples are disconnected and want to feel reconnected to one another.
Right away in to yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So, but again, I guess if they're having such strong relationship issues or something like that, that might mean we've got to do some of that work first.
Right. You have to make sure that the relationship is safe enough.
Yeah.
And that they're not tearing each other apart, or that there isn't domestic violence going on.
Right.
But other than that, no. And it does, like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, because it actually aids and abets the relationship therapy.
Right. And do people start naked, dressed? I mean, I guess, again, everybody might be a little bit different, but if people are listening to this and thinking, okay, we're going to try some Sensate focus. What's your sort of basic progression that you would suggest to people?
Absolutely. So I say to couples, if you're comfortable or reasonably comfortable doing this nude, then that's where you start. If you need to do it with some kind of shorts and a t-shirt on, that's fine. If you need to do it with underwear to start, that's fine. So it is very individualized. And they start, where they decide that they can tolerate or to see whether they can tolerate. They're always free to take a step back.
Right.
For some people who have a lot of phobias, we might start with hand caresses fully clothed on the living room couch. And that's the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
We can do this. Something else I didn't mention that's really important is, since this is not sexual per se, no kissing.
Okay.
And the other thing that's really important is no talking. So that is really difficult for people, because guess what happens when you're talking? Where are you?
Right.
Here.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, that seems like a really important instruction. I took that for granted, but you're right to mention it, because if they end up getting chatty, it's like, oh, they're not in their bodies like that. Yeah.
Yes. Now, sometimes they will, chat and, have humor initially in the first one, because they are nervous. And also they can be super ticklish the first time or two.
Yes.
And what I say to them is, are you able to tickle yourself? I mean, most people can't tickle themselves, maybe their feet, but ticklishness is actually social anxiety.
Right.
So as they are doing the exercises and handwriting if they feel anxious, and maybe taking a breath, the anxiety disappears and they're no longer ticklish.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the problems that couples might face if they're going to listen to this and think, oh, let's go try this? Are there certain kind of pitfalls or problems that they have? What are the things that might arise that could derail them?
Usually by the time I see couples, they have developed a lot of avoidance techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they coordinate the avoidance, like, oh, we were so busy. We have two children, we have grandparents, we have jobs. We were so busy. We thought we'd do it at the end of the week, but we didn't get to it. And, so failure to do it is the usual thing because they've been making excuses for themselves about it because there's anxiety. They're going to continue that pattern.
Yes.
So I asked them to make a commitment with one another to actually schedule the touching.
Okay.
And ask them to schedule it 3 times a week, knowing that, probably once that time is not going to work. So twice a week is a minimal.
Okay.
I ask them to make 3 appointments. And if the time comes and the person, one or the other says, I'm too tired, or, we've just had a disagreement, I don't really feel like it, or I had a stressful day at work, the one who declines is the one who reschedules it.
Okay.
So it's rescheduled so the avoidance is minimized. So avoidance is the biggest, most common problem I see.
Mm-hmm.
The second is no matter what you say about, I don't care if you like it, I don't care if you're aroused, I don't care if it feels good. Those are not all you're doing is practicing the 3 things: focusing on sensations, your own touching for yourself, focusing on sensations, and bringing yourself back from distractions. That's the magic formula. That's all you're doing is practicing that. Did I say anything about arousal? No, but people, it's so natural and it's such a desire on their part to feel something. But it's the striving to feel something that creates the anxiety that gets in the way, that creates the watching, which means you're not in your body. That's the other thing Sensate Focus does, is actually puts you back in your body.
Right.
So those are 2. The other one is partner pressure. Again, there's such a pattern usually set up that the partner so wants their partner to be aroused or to want to, and they're disappointed if not. And so some of those dynamics can get in the way also. Mm-hmm.
What do you generally recommend? Because I can imagine that would come up pretty often.
Mm-hmm.
How do you usually address that? They come back and they say, he or she was pressuring me, was so excited, and it intimidated me, and now I just don't want to do it. They're just pushing.
Exactly. So I commiserate with them. And yes, you guys have developed this pattern for the last 4 years of your relationship. And so even though I'm trying to reorient you, sometimes old habits take a while to change. And so I basically go over the idea that you don't get there by trying to get there. You get there by lending yourself to it, however it is. And it's building the foundation. You're looking at the roof. I'm at the foundation. Okay. So let's bring it back down to, how can I be more in charge and feel less pressured? If I set up the schedule, if I ask my partner not to remind me, okay. If I am in charge of touching first, what will help you feel like you are the person more in charge for right now? How can I help you feel empowered rather than reactive?
Yeah. Another thing I bring up with people is, the person who's doing the pushing, is I remind them how much of this work is internal. It's not about the physical act. It's about that ability to lower anxiety and be present and, and they're not going to see that necessarily. That's happening inside their partner. So to try to remind them that it's big work, but that it's invisible.
Yes. And what I always enjoy is the partner with the higher drive, eventually getting to the point where the other one is initiating, and the one with the higher drive is like, I don't know, again. Once you change that dynamic of the pressure, and you help the person feel present for themselves and know what to do, amazing things happen.
Yeah. One last question. the way you're talking about this is that this is one of the natural functions. And if we move these obstacles, it will emerge.
Exactly.
Does it always? What if it doesn't? What if the pressure really is gone and somebody can be present and they don't get aroused or they're not feeling desire? Like what do you think is going on at that point?
So, good question. So, initially, before you suggest Sensate focus, you've taken a history. And so you're asking questions that help you try to discern, is this a medical problem? Do we have low testosterone? Does that need to be checked out? So we want to eliminate all of the medicines that they might be taking. So we want to eliminate all of those possibilities. And then we ask about their childhood and how they were raised. And, if they say they were raised in a very fundamentalist religion where there was a lot of guilt about sex, then we might need to do a little work around letting that shame and guilt about sex diminish. And there might be some reading or work that they do with me initially. It might be couple dynamics that I missed, that I should have been working with earlier on. And they're like, everything's fine until it isn't, That's another thing about Sensate Focus. It not only fixes the problem, but it also brings up for processing that which you weren't able to see before. Like, for example, sometimes there's sexual trauma in the background that they don't remember. And as you're doing the touching, those things start to get triggered, and that is that suppression due to trauma comes up to be worked with again. Sometimes there's an agenda, like I've got another girlfriend and I just want to fix you so I can leave without feeling guilty. Okay. So sometimes that's there. Sometimes it's a sexual orientation or interest that the partner hasn't shared with them.
Okay.
And so you sort of do the least you need to do to fix the problem. When it's not getting fixed, you dig a little.
Right. Okay. So it's a sign that, okay, there are more obstacles here, more issues than maybe we knew at first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But giving them the assignment brings it up.
Right.
For processing. So I find that a very helpful technique for that as well.
Great. So would you tell people where, tell them about your book and where they can find you, where they can learn more about you and what you've got to offer?
Okay. So because Masters and Johnson did not write all this stuff down, they hardly published anything.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So their original description of how you do Sensate Focus, they emphasize that you don't have to have sexual response, that sort of thing, but they wanted you to touch to pleasure your partner and yourself. No pressure there.
Yeah, right.
And that is what most sex therapists were using, that strategy that was published in their book, 1972 book, Human Sexual Inadequacy. I was trained there in their 6-month training program, and I spent 5 years working there afterwards. And at that time, they were using Sensate Focus as I'm describing it. You don't touch to pleasure your partner or yourself. That's a pressure.
Right.
You touch for yourself, whatever, without evaluation. And so because when I was doing some research from my teaching, I saw that a lot of sex therapists who I really admired were using Sensate Focus in this other way. My colleague and I, Dr. Avery Clark, wrote this book, which is called Sensate Focus in Sex Therapy. And it's an illustrated manual. And so it gives, can I show a picture?
Well, the podcast people are just going to have to get the book to see the picture, but but you can show it here, and where I share it, they will see it. So
okay, and so it just gives you a picture of the various positions and ways of touching. So it shows you.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, to be using because there was nothing out there that had illustrations, and for some people, they're visual in terms of understanding how to do this.
Right.
Rather than just auditory, let me just describe what you're supposed to be doing. Or a lot of people were calling their secretary in to give a floor demonstration. So,
is the book suitable for just the couples that might be listening, or is it specifically for sex therapists?
It's specifically for sex therapists, but many of my couples have read the book or gotten the book to get the idea and understand what was behind it. And some have been able to use the book on their own. But
I would imagine that would be the case, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And do you have a website that you can share or where people can learn a little bit more about you?
www.sextherapist, St. Louis, STLOUIS.com.
Okay.
Yes. Is my website. And you can also Google my name, Linda Weiner, and it'll come up. And it used to be Weiner. And that's part of the reason I probably wound up being a sex therapist. My parents pronounced it Weiner. And when I went to college, I started pronouncing it Weiner, but the damage was done.
Right.
I'd been exposed to a lot of penis jokes. And so I was much more comfortable. But lucky was I, because my mother was going to name me after her mother. And her Yiddish name was Leah Weiner.
Oh, man.
Okay. Thankfully, she made it Linda. Americanized it.
Oh, right.
Relief.
Dodged a bullet there.
Uh-huh.
Well, right. Thank you so much for taking the time to cover all this. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye now.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.